Alright, so this occurred almost a year ago, while I worked the night shift at a local motel. But because it really frightened me so much, I still think about it constantly. Furthermore, I'm not sure what the man was attempting to accomplish or what his plan was. And to be honest, it sickens me to think about how long he was there and how I was unaware that he was unmeant to be there. The hotel had only 3 stories and perhaps 40 rooms. The location wasn't too crowded. On weeknights, typically only had 10 or 15 rooms occupied, from 10 o'clock p.m. to 6 o'clock a.m. I worked. Generally, it was quite quiet and dull, which I liked. I would simply sit behind the desk, work on some papers, occasionally check the cameras, and occasionally, if my phone was truly dead, watch YouTube on it. The lobby was small, consisting of a desk, a few couches, a TV, and a few vending machines in the corner. I had a computer, a chair, and a small office behind the desk with a glass window that allowed me to see the lobby when I was seated. Guests had to buzz in at night since the front doors automatically locked, and I had to activate a button to let them in. Other than the rare late visitor, little usually happened after midnight. However, this man entered the room at around 11 o'clock one night. The thought of it still makes my stomach turn. I opened the door for him when he buzzed. He was tall, in his mid-40s, somewhat slender, but not too thin, wearing trousers and a baseball cap, and he had a rucksack in his hands. He approached the receptionist and inquired as to whether we had a room available for the night. He nodded and took out a card when I said yes, and handed him the cost. I gave him a key card for the second floor room 214 after I swiped it, and it passed. I recalled that before he departed, he gave me one too long a stare. After I gave him the key, his eyes remained fixed on mine for about 3 or 4 seconds, and he had a sort of blank face. After that, he turned and headed for the elevator. Even though it didn't immediately seem scary, it was enough to get my attention. I then took a seat back in the chair and played for a while on my phone. When I peeked up at midnight, he was back in the foyer. He never showed up at the counter. He simply moved past me and took a seat in the couch-lined living room. He simply sat down in front of the TV, even though it wasn't on. I reasoned that perhaps he was having trouble sleeping. I didn't give it much thought, because occasionally, some visitors congregate in the lobby. However, after 30 minutes, I saw that he was merely sitting there doing nothing. He wasn't reading or using his phone. He wasn't even sleeping. He was simply looking at the blank screen in front of him. At one point, I stood up to get water from the vending machine. Additionally, I sensed him turn his head and keep an eye on me as I moved through the lobby. Until I was back behind the desk, I could feel his eyes on me. Even though I wasn't looking at him directly, I had a really uneasy feeling about it. I was bored at around 1 o'clock a.m. and was using the computer to check the reservation system. At that point, I became aware of an oddity. Primera sa W, Death Room 214 was marked as unoccupied. When I retrieved the list of occupied rooms, I muttered something under my breath and checked again, because I had only just checked on this guy an hour before. I wondered if I had made a mistake. I checked the check-in logs and found nothing for him. Nothing, no name, no fee. I then checked the transaction tab to confirm that his card had been processed earlier, and there were no payments visible. I recalled being really perplexed, as I swore that when I swiped his card and it beeped. As though it had worked, nothing at all was in the system. I picked up the phone at that point and dialed room 214. About 10 rings went unanswered. The keycard entry log, which indicates if the door to that room was open that evening, was then examined, but it revealed nothing. The room was empty of people. After I gave him the card, I discovered that he never even entered the room. He was still sitting there, gazing at the TV, which wasn't even on, when I turned to gaze into the lounge. I began to experience a terrible sensation in my chest. I sat there, contemplating my options. A part of me wondered whether the system had just glitched, but it was very obvious he was uneven checked in because the room had no charge and no entrance log. I watched him for 15 more minutes. I went over around 1:30 and inquired about how things were doing. He told me he simply couldn't sleep after turning his head and giving me a blank stare. He then turned back to the television. My hands were shaking as I returned behind my desk after nodding. I saw that he was no longer seated in the lounge at around 2. I didn't see him at all in the lobby. so my stomach fell immediately. After looking around, I saw him standing somewhat obscured by the darkness at the end of the corridor near the restrooms. He simply stood, motionless. I pretended to be on the internet while I continued to look up at him. After standing there for a bit, he gently made his way back and resumed sitting in the lounge as if nothing had occurred. I discussed the situation with my manager over the phone from my house. She seemed worn out and instructed me to watch him closely and contact the police if he did anything dangerous. I recall thinking that it already seemed dangerous when I hung up, but I was at a loss for what to do. After that, I looked at the security cameras. In the Inca card, the first floor hallway camera, I caught a glimpse of him. He proceeded down the corridor, came to a stop at the end, stood for a few minutes, and then turned to leave. He thereafter entered the stairwell and remained there for roughly 10 minutes. What he was doing in there is unknown to me. He was always somewhere else, by the elevators or by the vending machines. When I looked up from the computer, he used to be constantly staring while standing close to the lobby corner where the light didn't shine well. I contacted the non-emergency police line at 3:30 because I couldn't stand it any longer and said that I didn't believe the man in the hotel was a guest. They promised to send someone. As I waited, I saw that he had moved once more, this time toward the desk. He was observing me from a distance of around 15 feet. He didn't talk, and he didn't blink very often. He appeared to have a problem with staring. I was so terrified that I was having trouble breathing, so I pretended to type something on the computer. When the buzzer went off at about 3:50, I assumed it might be the police already, but it turned out to be simply another late-arriving visitor. The man turned his head and watched the visitor pass by after I swiftly let him in. His gaze followed him all the way across the lobby. I noted. I was much more alarmed by that, as it seemed like he was observing him. After a few minutes, the figure vanished once more. He was standing outside one of the first-floor guest room doors when I looked at the cameras, as if he were merely standing there. At that point, I made a real 911 call. I informed them that I had no idea what he was attempting to accomplish, and that he was outside a guest room. Officers were on their way, they said. He simply remained at the door for around 3 minutes, while I watched the camera feed, and then he slowly made his way back to the lobby. Upon his return, he approached the desk directly and leaned over the counter. He asked if there was any food after glancing at me. It disturbed me how low his voice was. I informed him that there were vending machines nearby. He smiled slightly before turning to leave. I waited there, pleading with the police to arrive, while I looked at the time. At 4:10, 2 officers finally arrived. I pointed directly at him as I welcomed him in. He had returned to his seat in the lounge. They approached him and spoke with him for a short while. They requested his identification and asked him unintelligible questions. They then escorted him outside. When one of the cops returned, he clarified that the man was not a visitor at all. He had no reservations or bags, and the credit card he gave me was stolen. He had only been acting to allow us to enter the structure. They accused him of both stealing the stolen card and trespassing. I sat there trembling till my shift ended, and they left. I thought I would see him again every time I glanced at the cameras. The realization that he had been strolling around the hotel for hours and standing outside of guest rooms, observing me from various locations, was the thing that disturbed me the most. Furthermore, he wasn't even meant to be there. Although I'm not sure what his plan was, I'm certain it wasn't good. The most terrifying night of my life was that one. Music. Meredith is my name. I am a 24-year-old night shift worker at a little gas station off County Road 11. Unless they are completely lost or out of petrol, most individuals don't even notice this type of sight. The job was peaceful and dependable, so I accepted it. That was something I used to enjoy. Around 1 a.m. on a Thursday, everything began. The hum of the overhead lights had been irritating me all shift, and the outside air was damp and still. The door chimed, just as I was ready to microwave a cinnamon roll that I was very interested in. A man in his mid-40s or older entered. He looked like he hadn't smiled in years, with a green coat, disheveled hair, and parched lips. Unlike most people, he didn't go for the chips or coffee. He simply stood by the counter and gazed at me with an odd sense of familiarity. "Hi," I said, trying to grin politely. The man said, "You always work this late?" I answered, blinking. Yeah, mostly." He grinned. "I figured," he said. I've gone through a couple of times. I noticed that you are usually there. I was more uneasy about that than I let on. Well, that's correct. Small town, I remarked. He stayed. Meredith's eye went cold. I didn't have a name tag on, just as I was going to ask him how he knew. He pointed to the whiteboard where I had written cinnamon coffee is back and said, I have nice handwriting. The majority of people have circles around their eyes. You make little cuts. It's incredibly thoughtful and specific. I didn't answer. He made no purchases. Simply observed me for a further minute, perhaps observing my responses. At last, he gave a nod, saying, I'm Paul. Just curious. That's all. Then he ventured out into the mists. Following that, he began to appear at random. Not every evening. It wasn't frequently enough for me to cease thinking it was a coincidence, but not frequently enough to shout stalker out. Occasionally, he would enter. On occasion, he would simply sit in his car with his headlights off, close to the lot's boundary. I made an effort to ignore him one evening. As usual, he entered, purchased a bottle of water, and stayed. He said, You're quieter tonight. Long shift. I quieted myself. He took his time scanning the store, as if he were making a list of everything. It must become solitary. It's just you and nobody else 4 miles out here in the dark, he replied. I'm fine, was my reply. On the counter, he leaned. Do you ever feel afraid as a woman by yourself at night? He didn't sound menacing. It got worse because of that. It seemed impartial and inquisitive, as if he were inquiring about the weather. I asked, do you need anything else? After taking a step back, he cocked his head. The rear room door is always locked by you. Astute. I saw that you check it nearly every night at 2:00 a.m. My stomach twisted. I didn't respond. With a gently, even contrite smile, he continued, I'll let you get back to it. Didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. Then he left once more. I began carrying my keys between my fingers as I made my way to my car after that evening. I had a tire iron stored behind the counter, even when no one else was home. I started taking showers with the bathroom door locked and replaced the curtains in my flat. On some nights, he failed to show up. It didn't help that sometimes I wouldn't see him for a whole week. In fact, it got worse because I had no idea when he would show up again. Like when I discovered a Polaroid on the counter after returning from a 10-minute break. The windshield washer bin behind the station was being refilled by me. It was captured in the close-up that evening. Close. The slash dot on the word I and the word windshield on the bin label had been circled in red ink, but there was no note with it. I urged him to go the next time he entered. I threatened to call the cops if he stayed. Paul merely gave a nod. I understand. I've been overly direct, I responded, my voice shaking. You've been following me, and I detested the fact that it did. You seem like the type of person who is accustomed to being misinterpreted, in my opinion, he said. I figured maybe you'd appreciate someone who pays attention. Not paying attention is what that is. That's obsession, I shot back. He did not recoil. Would it be simpler if I always brought a Coke and wore a smile? Is it more natural for me to talk about sports and act as though I did unnotice that your left eyelid twitches when you re-weary, or that your shoes are always a half size too big? I had already started dialing 911 by this time. I didn't let him stop me. He didn't fight back when the police arrived swiftly. He simply waited while keeping his arms by his sides. A notepad with dates and timings written on it was discovered when they searched his vehicle. It contained my grocery list, my clothes, my timetable, and notes regarding my stroll. On one sheet, my name was scribbled repeatedly in increasingly tight loops, until it resembled scribbles. He continued to say the same thing to the police. I simply become aware of something. I'm just an inquisitive person. That week, the restraining order was granted. I no longer work nights now. Even the town where I reside is different. I was moved to a different station 2 hours away by the firm. However, I still get a tickle down the back of my neck when I drive home and see headlights behind me for an extended period of time. And occasionally I still think about how he spoke my name. like if he had been practicing it beforehand and already knew how it would sound in his mouth. I want to begin by stating that this only occurred to me last night. As I write this, I am employed at a 24-hour gas station on the evening shift. I am a 22-year-old woman who has been employed there for just under 2 months. I work Thursday through Saturday, which is the weekend shift. On the other hand, another colleague, whom I will refer to as Max for privacy purposes, works Sunday through Wednesday at around 2:30 a.m. My coworker Max and a buddy of his ILL, call him Benhad, stopped by the station to greet each other and have coffee. A few hours before their arrival, Max and his companion had consumed some magic mushrooms. They were all laughing when I saw them, and to be honest, I found it to be pure entertainment. Ben had mentioned that there was a car parked in the lot with its lights out, but running that someone inside had been there before they pulled in. While we were chatting about other topics, when he asked the man, he said that he was awaiting an order from DoorDash. It was not unusual for DoorDashers to wait in their vehicle as we packaged up an order. It was strange because it had been over 2 hours since I had gotten an order. I could uneven see the parking lot, because I spent the majority of the night cleaning in the back of the store, away from the front doors and the tills. We dismissed it as unimportant, and the two men went outside to play with Max's dog and smoke a cigar. I didn't give it much attention at first, but once I was by myself, I felt that it was a little strange because I had no idea how long they had been out there before my coworker entered. After an hour or so had passed, they returned to buy more coffee. Max then went on to explain that the automobile had been parked outside in a location that was hidden by the wall. Even when I went to the register, he informed me that the man in the car had alternated between observing them and appearing to be texting someone on his phone during the whole hour they spent outside smoking and playing with his dog in the parking lot. In his euphoric condition, Ben approached the automobile after noticing this and inquired, "What's up? Why are you observing us?" The individual had attempted to act as though he didn't speak English at that moment. When that failed, he began speaking in English and claiming that he must have given the wrong address before scurrying out of the parking lot. He was unquestionably superior to Max. At that moment, Max claimed that the car had no license plate and appeared brand new, which was what made it so eerie. Additionally, he saw that there was a stack of blankets in the back enough to conceal someone. Additionally, another automobile with its lights off had just pulled into the lot when the man was confronted. An automobile with no registration plates that likewise appeared to be brand new, and the car that had just come in followed them out. As soon as the first vehicle had begun to drive away. Before they left, Max waited for another 15 minutes and advised me to exercise caution and to watch out. When he returned for additional coffee at around 6 in the morning, he was unquestionably sober. We therefore discussed it further. He claimed that the man was acting extremely suspiciously the whole time they were outside, watching team store doors and the parking lot entrance, while continuously checking his phone. He acknowledged that he was terrified. Additionally, he wanted to make sure I was okay when he had recovered from his high. We both agreed that there were other possible outcomes for this entire situation if they had even been present. After Max and Ben had departed and I was by myself, I am not sure if it was just a coincidence, or if those two cars were plotting to harm me. I might keep a knife on me for protection, but based on what they said, I have a feeling that it might not have worked out well if there were other people, and I might have suffered a horrible fate if they hadn't been there, simply having fun like kids in the parking lot. I'll provide an update if anything occurs during my shift tonight when I return to work. I wish I didn't have to give you an update, but I do. The automobile reappeared while I was working. This is how it took place. I was mopping the floors at around 3 in the morning, when 4 men entered to grab coffee and some food. One of them asked me if I knew anything about the automobile that was running with its lights out at the far end of the parking lot. When I was ringing them up, I asked the man what kind of car he was driving. He continued by telling me that there appeared to be 2 men fighting in the front seats of what appeared to be a brand new Subaru without any license plates. When he stated this, I felt my heart sink to my stomach. I informed the group that a vehicle with that identical. The description had been sitting in the parking lot the previous evening, but there's only one man there, who I took to be the group's leader. He told me that while they were filling up their truck, they noticed the car because it had been there when they pulled in, and that it had just sat there, since they were at the pump that was furthest from the doors. He informed me as they passed the car on their way to the door. He claimed that as they went by, they heard a man pointing to the store's doors while speaking loudly, but not nearly yelling. One of the guys started to approach the car as they were passing to inquire about how things were going. The guys in the automobile pushed the car in reverse and drove off when they eventually noticed them. I informed them that I thought the car was the same one that had been acting strangely in the parking lot the previous evening. There were other people there, and after being confronted, he appeared to be in a panic before driving off, followed by another vehicle. They volunteered to stay with me for a while to make sure they didn't return, but they looked frightened. They stayed for approximately 20 minutes after I asked if they were certain, and after they assured me there was no issue, we all concluded I was most likely safe. Before they departed and I was left alone, I gave them another thank you and gave them a free refill on their coffee. The remainder of my shift went without incident, although I definitely kept a watch on things, because I finally had to walk outside to change the garbage at the gas pumps. The thing that scares me the most is that I was warned about this car by several individuals before I ever saw it. I initially thought I was simply being paranoid, but it turned out to be nothing. However, it makes me question whether my worry is warranted when the same car arrives 2 nights in a row at about the same time and parks in a location that is hidden from view from the front windows or the register. If so, I'm just relieved that I had a different group of people arrive so that, should the guys in the car have chosen to enter, I wouldn't have been alone. Fortunately, I have the following few days off from work, and all I can do is hope the car doesn't arrive when I return to work. Daniel is my name. At the age of 29, I worked the night shift at a tiny motel in the country. It's a family-run establishment with 2 levels and perhaps 25 rooms overall. It's not a chain. My typical workday runs from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. at night. There's little traffic at the motel. If someone is passing through after midnight, there might be a few check-ins, but otherwise it's really quiet. I accepted the position for that reason. It suits me to spend most nights sitting in an empty building because I am not really a people person. The front desk, a few chairs, a coffee maker, and a small rack of brochures are all part of the main office setup. There is a hallway leading to a back office behind the desk. That back office resembles a lounge in certain ways. It features a TV mounted on the wall, a couch, a mini fridge, and another workstation. The cool part is that anytime someone rings the front desk bell, a small speaker back there dings. Typically, I just take a nap on the couch or watch something on my laptop while sitting in the back. When the bell rings, I then get up and move to the front. I've worked there long enough to be familiar with the routine. The front door buzzes when a visitor uses their key card after hours. The building occasionally creaks, and the heating clicks. All of those noises are common. However, the problem with working the night shift is that, if you think about it too long, even the everyday things may become annoying. Additionally, occasionally, things that initially appear regular turn out to be abnormal. This incident took place on a Tuesday evening in the fall. The parking area was deserted, save for 4 or 5 visitor automobiles, and the temperature was chilly, possibly in the 40s. I initially heard the bell at around 2:00 a.m. I got up from the rear couch and entered the main office. There was no one at the counter when I arrived. There was nobody in the lobby. Through the glass doors, I peered outside, but the road appeared to be deserted and dark. There were no headlights, no cars pulling in, nothing. The bell was really clear, so I knew I hadn't dreamed it, even if I thought maybe I had. I waited for a minute to see if anyone had arrived late, but nobody had. I then returned to the lounge. I took out my phone, sat on the couch, and spent some time scrolling. The bell rang once more in less than 10 minutes. I leaped to my feet and hurried inside the main office, only to find it empty once more. This time, the hair stood up on the back of my neck. I approached the doors and went outdoors. The parking lot has the same appearance as before. There was no activity, and all of the automobiles were parked with their lights out. There was also no one on the road. I moved to the sidewalk's edge and glanced in both directions, but I couldn't find any indication of life. Instead of heading to the rear this time, I went back inside and sat behind the front desk. I thought perhaps I was being played by someone who was intoxicated, sort of like a ding-dong ditch. Perhaps a visitor's child found it amusing. However, I began to unwind once again after sitting there for 15 minutes with nothing occurring. I decided it was just one of those strange things I would joke about later, so I opened my laptop and relaxed back in the chair. The bell then rang once more. I wounded myself when I snapped my head up so quickly. There was still no one in the lobby. My skin began to itch. I got up and circled the front desk to make sure no one was hiding, but nobody was. I looked over the lobby's restrooms. I even went outside one more time. Nothing. I briefly strolled around the lot while using the flashlight on my phone, but it was completely silent. When I returned inside, I made the decision to give something new a try. I chose to sit on the chair directly behind the front desk, rather than returning to the lounge. I wanted to be there to apprehend anyone who was skulking around and ringing the bell to trick me. I simply sat there listening after turning down the lobby lights a bit to make the space gloomy. I twitched at the slightest sound because it was so silent. The sound of the wall clock ticking was louder than normal. The refrigerator in the rear office hummed and clicked. The building creaked as it settled every few minutes. I crossed my arms as I sat there and gazed at the counter's bell. After 15 minutes, there were 20. As my eyes grew tired, I began to believe that perhaps the individual had given up. I even began to believe that I was imagining everything that occurred when I was allowing myself to unwind and fall asleep. The bell rung. This time, though, I could see what was causing it. From beneath the front desk, a pale hand reached across the counter and pressed the bell directly in front of me. I rushed down the hall into the back office, after jumping up so quickly that I am positive the chair nearly toppled over. I locked the door after slamming it, and with my heart thumping, I stood there in the dark. I couldn't stop wondering how someone could be under there. Although there isn't much room underneath the desk, someone could crouch there if they were able to. This implied that they had been waiting and hiding a short distance from me. I made myself glance at the security screens. 4 cameras were installed. 2 in the parking lot, 1 in the corridor, and 1 in the lobby. I noticed that the chair had seemingly toppled over in my haste in the lobby feed. It appeared like the counter was empty. Then I noticed movement in the frame's lower corner. From behind the desk, a head emerged. Only the silhouette and the sparkle of eyes looking directly into the camera were visible to me. I was unable to make out any details. I moved away from the screen. I was unable to look at it. With trembling hands, I picked up my phone and dialed 911. I told the operator in a whisper that there was a break-in and that the perpetrator was hidden in the lobby. She informed me that the police were en route and advised me to remain where I was. I kept an eye on the display while I was on the phone. The head of the individual vanished. Then I caught a glimpse of the individual crawling on all fours out from behind the desk. After crawling to the door, he got to his feet. His posture was slumped over, and he was tall and wearing a hoodie with the hood pulled tight. Then, as if searching for something, he turned around and began to move through the lobby. Then he turned and moved toward the hallway leading to the rear office, leaving the camera frame. I placed my back against the door that was locked door. The knob rattled a moment later. There was a very slow rattling just once, followed by nothing. For a few seconds, I was unable to respond to the dispatcher's repeated questions about my safety, because I felt like my throat was shutting up. After what seemed like an eternity, I heard footfalls, slow and steady. I hastily returned the monitor. Once more, the man was pacing the lobby. At one point, he appeared to be waiting for someone as he stood in front of the glass doors and gazed outside. Then, as though he were mockingly passing the time, he approached the brochure rack and began leafing through the papers. The minutes passed slowly. At last I noticed red and blue lights flashing through the parking lot cameras. The police arrived. 2 vehicles. The man abruptly ran out of frame, indicating that he must have seen it too. I heard the front doors open a second later. He was not inside when the officers left the building, but they did discover a big rock close to the front door that was probably used to hold it open. He has vanished. The police informed me that whoever it was must have slipped away as soon as they pulled up after they searched the lot and looked at the road. After seeing how the hand simply reached up from behind the desk and pressed the bell, I couldn't stop replaying it in my mind. Calm as anything. I now remember that night and the event. Every time I hear that bell at night, I doubt I'll ever have the same perspective on that desk again.